I'm Britt Bingold, and you are listening to Season 3 of Learning Unlocked. Educators are the key holders to unlocking learning for students. Today, as always, my goal is to provide you with resources and tools, the keys, to enable and accelerate learning for all students. Thanks for joining me today. Let's get started. Hey key holders, welcome back to Learning Unlocked. Today I'm engaging in what I believe is a very important conversation, and it is regarding how teachers instruct their students. I am joined by my fellow instructional specialists in our district, Wendy Peterson and Julia Salsi. We have been working our way through year one of a rollout in our district of an instructional framework. If you have been following along with this series and the podcast, we have so far discussed Connect, which is about making those relationships with our students, and Design, which is honing in on what goes into high quality lesson design versus lesson planning. But today is where the rubber meets the road. Instruction is when we take our relationships with students and leverage our lesson designs in order to instruct them in a way that is clear, intentional, and engaging. And as you hear in this episode, we are very passionate about the impact quality instruction has on student learning. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Welcome. Hey, key holders, welcome back to Learning Unlocked. Today we are recording episode 29, and I am welcoming back my colleagues Julia Salsi and Wendy Peterson to discuss our Instruct module of the framework. If you haven't listened to the other episodes before this, you can totally go back. They have the words design and connect in bold, or not bold, girls, what am I trying to say? Uppercase, I guess.
Yes.
That you can go, and it's a series that we're doing based on our district framework initiative. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
And even though it's Gilbert District,
Mhm.
it's applicable to anybody.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why we're putting it on the podcast, because
Right.
as we've gone through and done some things with teachers and principals, and it's rolling out throughout our district, we felt it was definitely worthwhile to get out to everyone. So we have done an episode about connections with students and building relationships. We've done an episode about designing lessons. And so today we're going to talk about our favorite thing as instructional specialists,
Woo-hoo.
Instruct. So the first concept of that domain, the Instruct domain, is teacher clarity. And we talked about teacher clarity in the last podcast. So what we have to do now is define what teacher clarity is and is not, especially in this realm of Instruct versus Design. So what is teacher clarity with Instruct?
So when we talked about teacher clarity during the design component of the framework, we were really talking about teacher clarity in regards to the teachers, how clear the teachers were on what they were teaching and why they were teaching it. As we now dive into teacher clarity in the Instruct domain, we're talking about how clear the students are on what they're doing and why they are doing it. So really, we're now going to dive into, can the students tell us what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how are they going to know when they get it? Because they need to be able to articulate that through whatever strategies or instruction that you're using. They have to be able to tell you why they think they're doing those things.
Wendy, what is teacher clarity not?
Well, first of all, teacher clarity is not putting an objective or anything else up and assuming that will just naturally sink in. That osmosis. I've been in some classrooms also where it's written so teeny tiny that I've had to literally, and this is not because I'm old, walk right up to the board to look at it.
Right.
And so the teacher thinks that he or she has done it and checked it off the list because it's on the board. So it's not just putting it up because your principal told you you needed to, and
never referring to
it or doing anything with that.
Yeah, I see clarity as a strategy in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that you are planning to
Yes.
do with clarity maps or whatever, however you're organizing your learning intentions, your learning targets, your success criteria. You are planning to have students do specific things with those as part of the instruction process.
Okay.
Well, and so people who've taken my classes have sometimes heard me refer to when I was modeling it was a kindergarten or first grade classroom, and I was in there for about an hour and a half. And one of the teachers watching me decided to tally how many times I went back to that day's I can statement.
Mm-hmm.
And had the kids say it and move with it and talk about what are we doing right now and how does it go back to that. And I think it added up to, it was like 30 times in an hour and a half. Now that's probably overkill. I'll admit that. But it's way better than here it is in little teeny tiny lettering on the board and never referring to it.
Or just saying even at the beginning of a lesson and then just moving on.
Yeah. And that doesn't work either.
No.
Today we're going to learn about finding the main idea, and then we just move on.
Right.
No, that you're not going to get any effect.
That's not really the teacher clarity that we want to focus
no.
on.
Right.
And we think will help teachers and kids.
Correct.
Whoever you are, wherever you are. So let's then move to, teacher clarity. We know what it is. We know what it's not. We talked about it in the last podcast. But what does this student version of teacher clarity look like in practice? What would the teacher be seeing? What would the students be doing? How would the room look? That type of thing.
Well, I would see students regularly reflecting on whatever it is that they're working on, reflecting on how they're doing against the success criteria, against the learning targets of the day. I would see students having a copy of some type of clarity map or learning goals and scales, something that articulates for them what those learning targets are, what success is described as, or even better, what success looks like. Especially when you're talking about littles who aren't reading,
Right.
you want to be able to see some of that model work. I want to hear kids being able to say, I can do this and this, but I can't do this because, and my next steps are to this.
Right.
And that really makes kids partners in the learning process.
Ownership.
rather than just passive onlookers. They're a part of their learning process because they're articulating as much as the teacher is what they can and can't do.
And, sometimes we feel like we have to go full in. And so if you need to start with just having kids being able to say what they're learning and why.
Yeah.
And then after they have that, then move into some of those deeper questions that Julia just talked about. And so I was very clear. Remember, I don't believe in keeping secrets from kids. So I was really clear with my students. Somebody could walk in here, and it happened all the time. Somebody could walk in here and come to you and say, what are you learning? Why are you learning it? You got to be able to answer that question, and not just in a rote way,
Right.
but in a deeper understanding way. The other thing I used to have students do, and this was way before I had the good influence of Julia and Brett, they had to write down I don't even know what we called it back then, but like the objective or the I can statement, they had to write it down.
They've been called so many different things.
They have been, especially if you've been around as long as I have. But then they also had to rate themselves at the end of the lesson on effort and then how well they understood the concept. And so it's just a 1 to 4 scale on both. But that allowed me to have a conversation with them about how clear they were on what we were learning and what progress they were making. So I always look to see something like that where students are interacting with the learning target or the goals or wherever you are in this journey.
For teachers that are unclear about, because we talk about learning goals and targets and success criteria, and for teachers that are unclear about what those things are, can we do like a quick maybe definition of what we define those things to be, and then kind of how we came up, because you mentioned clarity map, and so people listening might be like, what? Sounds lovely.
Yeah.
What is that? So I just want to make sure we're, if it's not a visual podcast, it's an audio. So how can we describe that in a way that they will understand it
act
better?
it out, but then when you said that, that might not
I
work.
think that's going to
And
work.
I'm going to defer to Julia. I always tell people I run into, yes, I understand it, but Julia is the guru. So here she is. Bum, ba-da-da.
Guru time.
I will do my best without having a visual aid. So
use it.
So the most
Your
important
mind's
thing,
eye.
I know,
Yeah.
the most important thing we do with students is teach them the priority skills of our content area or series of content areas. So we take the priority standards or a priority standard and we create a learning goal. And that learning goal is a student-friendly version of that priority standard. We always, we teach it that it starts with, I am learning to. So it becomes that answer, what are you doing? Or it becomes the answer to why are you doing it? So that's the big overarching goal. It's the learning goal. And that's something that you're taking a series of days, if not a couple of weeks, to achieve mastery on. Then we take that learning goal and we break it down into these success criteria. What will it mean to be successful with that learning goal? And those become the I can statements taken directly from the priority standard.
So we don't take the statements from the learning goal that we've created that's in student-friendly language.
No.
Okay.
We retain the language of the standard for the success criteria. The point of the learning goal is we want it to be something that the students can repeat easily when asked.
Right.
What we do is we then take the success criteria and we place it in a 3-column chart, and the success criteria gets placed in the 3rd column, and we call that the got it column. Then we back up and we write the learning targets that we're going to hit along the way to get to that success criteria. And those are the series of I can statements. We have starting out I can statements. We have on my way I can statements. And then we hit the success criteria, which is the got it. And we call that 3-column chart our clarity map. So we have a priority standard that becomes a learning goal. We then take from the standard, we determine what the success criteria is. That becomes our got it column. And then we have learning targets for the starting out and on my way.
So, and for the listeners, I'm going to link a sample in the show notes so that you guys can see that when you guys go to the website. But it's very similar to Marzano's learning goals and scales. And then we kind of mixed it with some John Hattie effect sizes. And it kind of just became this thing that we call a clarity map, because really it's not a rubric. It's not anything to be used as grading, but it does provide students and teachers as they create them real clarity on what is happening in the classroom.
Well, and I always talk about it as it becomes the conversation language between the student and the teacher. It becomes a way for the student to talk to the teacher about what they can or can't do.
Which would have been enormously helpful for me as a struggling math student. My parents always said, well, are you asking questions? I'm like, no, because I don't know what questions to ask. Right. A clarity map would have helped me do that. And also, Brett, you were saying about not a rubric. So I think a lot of people, you want a rubric. No, I don't want it. So a rubric would be more for a product of some kind. This, which would be generally a summative assessment. A clarity map is for learning along the way.
Right.
So keep that in mind. Yes, there are similarities between them, but they aren't the same.
Yeah, there's no points assigned to the I can statements. And I think that's really important for teachers to see. And you can definitely do formative assessments on the I can statements, but they don't need to, you're not using the actual clarity map as a rubric. But I think it's definitely an amazing tool, and I definitely want to link that for those who don't have the access to it. So as we move into concept 2, which is intentional instruction, and we're talking about clarity, so let's bring some clarity here. All right, let's clarify first, what do we mean by putting the word intentional in front of the word instruction?
Well, let's go back to the clarity map, right? We have these learning targets that we're trying to hit along the way to the success criteria, whether that's objectives and that you use, whatever you're trying,
Goals, whatever
whatever skill you're trying to have them master that particular day. Intentional means that you are choosing a high yield strategy because you believe it to be, or you know it from past experience, to be the most effective strategy to use with that skill with those students.
Yeah. And we talked about high yield strategies in the last podcast that we did with design. So go ahead and look back, and I've linked high yield strategies to that podcast. But really, that's where you're being intentional in that lesson planning design, and then you're pulling it into your instruction. So these two really do connect very well together, design and instruct, because
They're intertwined.
You can't do one without the other. Yeah. Okay, so but now we need to even go further. So we've got intentional instruction, which is under the category of direct instruction, right? No, it's not.
Direct instruction is under the category of intentional instruction.
I became British quite all of a sudden. So my arrows on my sheet didn't work. So, but
direct instruction.
Honestly, we just want to talk about the difference between intentional instruction, direct instruction, and lecture.
Yes.
Because those three things, honestly, no matter how wrong I just said that, are the three things that I think even us get confused with, and I think teachers get confused with, and I think they need to be separated out of it. So, what is the difference between direct instruction and lecture? Let's go with that first.
Well, first, let's just get rid of the traditional lecture.
Okay.
That's the first thing I want to say. I'm just jumping in there.
I've heard several master teachers.
Yes.
Say lecture quite often still. Is part of their normal vernacular.
Well, but then they're not master teachers. What do you mean by master teachers?
I want to say
old timers.
I want to say people that are doing things in education now that seem current, like not obviously a Marzano and Hattie, but people of that type of caliber that are still using lecture in their books or in their podcast episodes, and it makes me twitch every time I hear it.
Well, I wish that our listeners could see my face.
I wish they could too.
Because like my chin's dropped down to the table.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but it makes me literally my skin crawls every time I hear it.
And I'm going to turn it over to Julia again. Really, this should have been her podcast, and I should be sitting in my office.
No, it shouldn't.
No. Peanut butter cups or something. So yeah, if we just lecture. If we're really good, we're entertaining and interesting and captivating, and that's just awesome.
Right.
But it's not the best way to teach kids. That doesn't mean that you can't, as the teacher, talk and not be all those things. But there's so much more to helping students learn. I've sat, with lots of keynote speakers and such. And I don't think that without interaction, you retain some bits and pieces, but not enough to make it learning.
Because I think, really quick, just to be devil's advocate.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of storytellers that are very good, and they consider their lectures to be valuable because they're telling stories, and storytelling can be an effective strategy. So I think that's where the feeling like lecture is a valid piece of educational pedagogy still is in the conversation. Randy's raising her hand at me. I'm bringing this up because I really do feel like it's important. Yes.
I teach a class on what's called a public narrative by Gantz, Ganz. I think he's a Harvard professor. I didn't plan to talk about this, but when I teach that class, I use all sorts of quotes on the power of storytelling. Storytelling is extraordinarily powerful, and I believe the best teachers are, in fact, really good storytellers. but that is not the be all and end all. And even with what Gantz talks about in public narrative, which originally was created for like protesting,
Disseminating information.
really, that is like a 10-minute cycle divided into 3 parts about how to tell a good story. That is not about, I'm going to tell a really great story for the next hour and a half.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, Julia, you go now because you got this.
No, and I asked you, obviously, devil's advocate, because I understand that you teach that, and I like that you said it's a cycle because that goes very well into what we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, so when we say don't lecture, so many teachers take that to mean don't talk
At all.
at all, and they panic. They're like, well, I have stuff I need to teach the kids.
Well, direct instruction
And
is higher on
yeah.
Patty's scale, and so they're confused.
Right. And so lecture implies that you are speaking the entire time frame that you are given. Direct instruction means that you are speaking in bursts. You are conveying information in a certain amount of time, or you are demonstrating or modeling a skill in an amount of time that whatever each student you have is able to follow along with you. And then you are stopping and you are giving the students the opportunity to actively engage in whatever you just gave them. It's really giving them the time to move things from the short term into the long-term memory, and to process and to make room in that frontal, is it the prefrontal cortex?
Yes.
I'm so bad with the name.
Yes.
Up front, if you could see my forehead right now.
Language and development processing.
Yeah, so that can only hold so much.
Yep.
And if you don't provide students the opportunity to file that away in some way, shape, or form by engaging with it, by making neural connections to things that already exist in their brain, it goes away. And so I always tell teachers, a good gauge is your student's age in minutes. That's about as long as they can follow along with whatever story you're telling, or with whatever you're modeling for them. Now, what's really nice is the littles will show you they're done, that they can't follow you anymore.
Will they show
They're literally falling out of their chairs
or rolling on the floor,
wandering the room, picking their
crying,
nose, crying, whatever,
Mhm.
doing the potty dance,
Yeah.
whatever. But slowly, as we progress into school, we get very good at the affect of school, the physical affect of school. And so we can nod and smile like the best of them, and our brains can go completely, wherever they want. So when we talk about direct instruction, what we're really talking about is a short burst of information or a modeling of a skill, and then the students doing some type of active learning experience. And active learning experience means that they're engaged, they're thinking, they're making connections, they're really trying to move that information into the part of the memory where they can recall it later. And the only way they can do that is if they build those neural pathways by doing with it. And I come back to the idea of storytelling, which I love. Storytelling, I think, though, and this is in my humble opinion, is phenomenal. I can remember all my storytelling teachers, and I remember being enthralled. And I can remember what they told the stories about. But that was just it. I had knowledge, but I didn't know what to do with that knowledge.
Yeah.
So storytelling was great at giving me knowledge to remember, but it wasn't great at showing me what to do with that. And so if we can harness the power of storytelling with active learning experiences, I think we have the most phenomenal lesson possible.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah.
See, this is why I ask questions like this, because then beautiful things happen and it makes me so happy.
It's exciting, really. It's exciting. So, and especially with our secondary teachers who tend to be more lecturers, we're not saying to toss that baby out with the bathwater.
No.
We're just saying stop.
Think a little
Occasionally
bit about what you're doing.
And let your students
jump in.
do something with it.
And,
Julia, and not just take notes.
Oh, yeah.
It's not, yeah. Julia,
We're gonna. I think we're gonna get to that a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just,
you had a moment of panic.
Yeah, I had a moment
Maybe
of
I
panic.
should record these live. Maybe we should make these YouTube lives. Okay.
Oh, that would be fun. No, too dangerous.
So there's no editing out.
There's
it's
no
enough.
editing there, so no.
Okay, so With the oh no, I lost my train of thought. Oh, it's so fine. It's totally okay. We'll move on to the next question and maybe I'll think of it. But I think that's a good idea of marrying the storytelling and the intentional instruction with direct instruction, those short bursts. Oh, I remember it. Julia, you and I were talking about boosting student retention because the rate of learning loss after you say it is very drastic. What do you remember shoot, man. I don't remember the number, but it was drastic. As soon as you say something, I think within a few minutes it could be gone.
I feel like it was something like 15, but there's it's called the forgetting curve.
Yeah.
I'll link to it.
Yeah,
I'll provide that for you, but it's called the forgetting curve and it's really powerful. You can search, there's quite a few videos on it that demonstrate it.
It's not a happy thing as a teacher to watch because you're like, I'm saying all of this and this is how much they're forgetting.
Right.
How about how little they're remembering.
Exactly.
Well, and it's very It's actually, I find it very fascinating, and it talks about how if they just re-engage with it every 15, 20 minutes, you can actually reduce that substantially.
So that's why the short bursts and the cycle of instruction short bursts is so important, and that's what I wanted to jump in and
I'm
mention that
a little bit of a kind of an old teacher joke, although it's not funny. I taught them that.
Yeah.
Okay, if that means that you said it to them and they didn't remember, you didn't actually teach them anything.
Told them something.
So when you were saying that about the forgetting curve, and I would just like to add that if you're 57, that forgetting curve is really, really bad.
It's bad for all of us, actually.
Yeah, I know. But, parent brain causes the forgetting curve
please,
too.
Wait till you're old.
And chronic illness brain. Yeah, we're super great here. But
one of the other things that I found really fascinating when we talk about instruction and retention, I just have to jump in because I've just been reading on this, is the power instructionally of giving students the opportunity to connect new knowledge to knowledge they've already mastered.
Amen.
It's kind of like the difference in the brain between when they go to recall something new, having to take the surface streets to get to it.
Oh, nice.
Versus if they were able to connect it to something they've already mastered and know, they get like a highway.
I like
to
that
recall
analogy.
the information.
Ooh.
And so I found that very fascinating. So anything that you can do to connect to prior knowledge.
Because you're building stronger dendrites in the brain, which, neurologically pathway-wise, you're getting a highway instead of surface streets. I love that. Okay, awesome. So let's follow up now because is it the only instructional strategy in the top, like 5?
In our top, I think.
Yeah, really.
One.
It's the only, I'm going through my little file cabinet in my brain. It really is the only
Let's test the forgetting curve.
truly instructional strategy.
That's what I think too, right?
It's a drop after a 1.
Okay, so
where we start getting other strategies.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
It's the
So
only
this
one over
is
one.
the only 1/1 on, if we're looking at visible learning, John Hattie, and he talks about it is in terms of the potential to considerably accelerate student learning. The strategy is Jigsaw, and it's a 1.2. And I really want to bring Jigsaw back to life. I feel like somehow along the way we buried it. And I think it needs to be risen from the dead. And I'm going to throw this to Wendy because she teaches an amazing class on it. But were either of you surprised when you first ever found out about John Hattie? Were you like Jigsaw? Or were you like, oh, yeah, Jigsaw? Like, what was your original thing?
I'm just going to confess that I was like, Jigsaw?
Okay.
It was not, I think I was that generation going through my teacher prep program that it had been around for a little while. Wendy's she's not going to talk to me. Thank goodness I brought in chocolate today. That I just thought first of all, I think I thought it's so simple. Like, really?
Like, how is this the highest?
Yeah. And I think, again, we were of the generation going through teacher prep that, technology was kind of at the forefront of education. People were really trying to figure out how that wove into teaching and learning. And so a lot of the focus was there. And what was popular prior to that was kind of getting pushed aside and thrown out. And And so, so I was surprised, knowing what I know now from my brilliant colleague Wendy.
Trying to redeem yourself.
I understand now why it's so high.
Yes. I think I was the same with Julia. I was like, jigsaw. And then all of a sudden, something fired in my brain, which I learned way after my teacher prep program, was this unit we did on Tim Burton. And we watched several of his clips of his videos, and the students wrote an essay about his style. And the entire unit was jigsaw. And it was over and over and over and over and over. And I remember those being the best conversations, the best discussions my students have ever had about how a technique can impact purpose, audience, persona, imagery, whatever. And so I think that was the only reason I wasn't surprised by it. My initial reaction was, what? And then I remembered that unit that we used to do. And I was like, yeah, those were the best essays I ever had, was when I used jigsaw almost for an entire unit.
Yeah.
All right, Wendy, are you ready?
No, because you people have said it all. And
we have not even talked about what creates the official 1.2.
And
people mess it up all the time.
I'm glad that Julia made her confession publicly, because if it had been privately, nobody would find her body probably. Except that she did confess and ask for forgiveness. So because I love her, we can move on. I've used jigsaw forever because it was popular when I went to college in the Stone Age. It is, however, something that teachers have used and abused because it does take longer. So if you're still focused on, I have to cover American history from 1492 to 2021, you're not going to be able to do a jigsaw. If you're focused on skills, then jigsaw is your way to go.
Your best friend,
best friend. Well, and so we have to remember that with jigsaw, you're normally dividing up some kind of a text. And in my class, I say it really is nonfiction. Very difficult to do jigsaw with a fictional text. And teachers' faces go, oh.
You mean I can't give the kids the end of the story and expect them to understand what's happening?
It does not work to say, you did chapter 1 in Charlotte's Web, you did chapter 2 in Charlotte's Web.
Yeah, and then like one kid in the corner is crying with their group, and the kids are like, what's going to happen? Yeah, that's not good.
So there are ways, it's more like reciprocal teaching blended with jigsaw if you... Boy, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah,
but
let's not bring that up.
That can be done with fiction. With little children, you can do some jigsaw-y things. So you have to have a text. It needs to be divided up relatively equally, although you can differentiate this way too by giving a simpler text to struggling students without them knowing it's a simpler text, of course. So students usually on their own, but there are ways to mix it up, usually on their own would begin reading the text. You would have some sort of activity with that, even if it's some sort of note-taking strategy, focus, answers to questions. And then students would need to go into an expert group. Now, this is the part that teachers most often leave out because it takes more time.
You have to get up and move.
So students need to get up and move. And if I read the section on Alexander Hamilton, I would be getting with all the other people who read the section on Alexander Hamilton. If Julia read about Thomas Jefferson, she'd go meet with the other Thomas Jeffersons. And if Britt, let's say, Hercules Mulligan, she was learning all about him.
How did you know he was my favorite?
She would be headed with the Hercules Mulligan people.
Right.
We would then make sure that whatever focus the teacher gave, that all of us got there, and we would add to each other's knowledge. And this, in and of itself, is a way to differentiate, because even students who tend to be better readers, better thinkers, can get things from students who struggle a little bit more. So they ensure that their knowledge is sound and correct.
Well, they're actually experts.
They become experts.
Right.
And if I couldn't get the answer to a question or didn't understand some part, this is where I say to the other folks in my group, hey, you guys, I don't understand this part.
Right.
And somebody there will help me understand it, and it's okay. Of course, you've set a structure in your classroom that means it's a safe place, that mistakes are not only accepted, but valued. So after I truly am an expert, then I go back to my home group. And so now I'm meeting with the Alexander Hamiltons and the Thomas Jeffersons and the Hercules Mulligans. Oh, and somebody's doing John Lawrence too.
Okay.
We come back together,
Right.
and we, with whatever structure really the teacher wants us to use, we share that information with each other, usually as some sort of a group product.
Right.
However, and here's the other part that teachers forget about, there has to be individual accountability. So if I only become an expert on Hamilton, but I don't know anything about Jefferson,
or you just briefly wrote down something about Jefferson from your share.
Right. Oh, right. So I wrote it down, but so there has to be some sort of synthesis or processing that allows everybody to learn. Now, that does not happen in a 40-minute class period. Okay, no. And that's the other thing, is teachers want something that they can do in 45 minutes from beginning to end and be done. Okay, when I did Jigsaw with my students, we might be working on something for a week or more. So they process it together, they synthesize it together, but ultimately they have to go with the learning on their own. Right. They have to be responsible for all of the parts, but they still have their expert group as a scaffold, and then they have their home group as a scaffold. I often say everything we used to call cheating, we now call learning. Like, don't look at anybody else's paper. Don't talk to anybody else. Now I'm saying, look at your neighbor. See what your neighbor did. If you don't understand this, grab the person across from you. Right. And so those are all the benefits, that 1.2 effect size of Jigsaw. Clearly, I get passionate about this. And I want to remind teachers, you don't do it one time in September and then be go, like, woohoo, I considerably accelerated my students' learning. Right. It's something consistent, and it is something that students eventually manage more on their own. Theoretically, in high school and in college, students can do this on their own. So they have a study group for a class and some awful old professor who's just mumbling along. Then you go, okay, you take Alexander Hamilton, you take Hercules, I'm going to take John Lawrence. We did this in college all the time. Right? And so teaching it to kindergartners and on up is a way to help them know how to do it on their own.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, I got to have a drink of coffee now.
And that's why I wanted to go over, and that was really the bulk of this section, was if we're talking about Instruct as a podcast topic, we got to talk about these different words that we hear. Direct instruction, lecture, jigsaw, intentional instruction, like there's just so many words that it's like, okay, I got to make sense of all of these in my brain somehow and how they apply to my kids in my classroom.
Just come take my class. Even if you don't teach in Gilbert.
Sure, they'll just fly across the country and come see you.
I would love that.
I know you would.
Or they could fly me across the country.
There you go.
To them.
There. She's plugging her own self. That's what she's doing. All right.
Especially if you're in the Pacific Northwest.
So part of teacher clarity, intentional instruction, is formulating questions through higher order questioning. And so this was like the buzzword, I feel like, before differentiation. I feel like it was like everything was about higher order questioning. You got to have higher order questioning. You got to have critical thinking skills. We got to get that. And I want to flesh out what it means and how it should be used in the classroom. And I want to talk about both how teachers should use higher order questioning, but how also students should be using higher order questioning. They're both looking at me now.
Well, I just had a thought when you said buzzword, because there are so many.
I know.
That we should
did you just swirl?
Yes, I think we should do a bingo board, and I may do it for the group that I'm going to see this Thursday.
So she just went off onto a lesson plan.
You write down all the buzzwords, and every time I say one,
you cross it off
and yell bingo or Hattie or something.
Because it gets confusing, and I think teachers are like, I've heard this before, and I know how to do a higher order question.
Right, and we say all the time, higher order thinking, metacognitive strategies.
I just want to back up and say, if we go back to that idea of direct instruction, you're giving them some new form of information or modeling some new skill. And then you are giving them time to actively engage in that. Engagement, to me, comes through higher order thinking. And so when you're creating those activities that could be a question, that promotes thinking, that they're discussing, that and it's something
Okay, but it's not, here's what's not to me. It's not who's the main character of the story.
Well, yeah, no.
Like, I just... I'm not joking, though. Like, I
that's a question.
Right.
That's not a question that promotes higher order thinking.
Or complex conversations or discussion.
No.
And so, like, we got to move away from those, like, study guiding questions. Not that they're not important. We need to know those things. But, like, where are the...
It's scary, I think, for some teachers to pose questions that don't have concrete answer.
I think that's absolutely 100% it.
Hallelujah.
And so I think that's where we end up with some of those study guides.
Yes.
I was the queen of study guides.
So was I.
By the way.
Until I met Julia and she told me I couldn't use them anymore. I
made killer study guides. If any of my former students are listening, they rocked, didn't they?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
She's apologizing now.
We've all used study guides.
Okay, but go more onto what does it sound like? Let's flesh it out. Like, what does a higher order question sound like?
To me, a higher order question requires some type of comparison.
Okay.
It requires some type of connection to prior knowledge.
So like some blooms, some...
Yeah, but I think Julia said it earlier. It's a question where there isn't an answer that is readily available.
Yeah. Could be abstract, maybe like a metaphor.
And it involves synthesis. Well, okay. It includes analysis first. We're going to take whatever this is apart. And we're going to look at all those parts.
Yeah.
And we're going to put it back together. And then we're going to look at something else's parts and put it back together. And then we're going to take those 2, 3, 4, 12 things that we've studied their parts and synthesize them in some way. That's, I mean, am I right? I've never thought about it like that, but.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just a matter of let's go to a standard study guide question.
Yeah.
Describe Atticus Finch.
Right.
That's a standard. You might see that. It's not a question, but it's an action.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm going to write more than 1 or 2 words. So it must be a great question.
So a different way to approach that requires higher order thinking could be, you could provide them a quote by Teddy Roosevelt.
Nice.
Or, and then explain how Atticus exemplifies or does not exemplify the points made in that quote. You could take some other text that you'd read that year. Friar Lawrence. How are Atticus Finch and Friar Lawrence alike and different?
They're having to retrieve
and they're having to break the parts.
Stronger.
Yeah, building those information superhighways in their brain. And I think so. It really is a matter of taking the questions you're already asking as a teacher and turning them into, first of all, those are much more interesting questions as a student to answer.
I'm already doing the Atticus Finch Friar Lawrence thing. I'll have that to you after lunch, okay, Julia? Because I got to be thinking about this.
We have other things to do, and apparently we've given ourselves assignments.
We do.
Yeah, and I think Wendy would like to be the queen of the world. She's been going for it for a while.
A long time.
So if you could support and, liking the podcast and subscribing would help towards that.
It would.
But random calling.
Oh, you were really going there today, huh?
Yeah, girlfriend. When we do random calling, I feel like some of the questions that are asked are not higher order questions.
Yeah.
And then there's no wait time. And there's so much wrong with this situation. And I just...
we're all kind of,
Because then you're asking yourself, like, oh, they are using random calling. But is the time they're spending using the random calling time well spent?
Okay, so frankly, I would be happy if they just used random calling.
I know.
What color was Juliet's dress? Okay? it would be an improvement.
But I have to say that is an improvement, and I know that. But I feel like we could use the power of random calling.
So may I just talk about random calling first? And
yes,
then
I'm giving you the platform for random calling.
Thank you. You two can
I told you I would.
You did tell me you would, and I almost forgot about it. But if you thought I got passionate about Jigsaw,
just you wait, people.
You wait.
Buckle up. Maybe have to pull over.
Right.
You're listening to this in your car.
So
I know.
Random calling was introduced to me many years ago when I was still in the classroom, and I count it as one of the top 5 things that changed my teaching. And I began to use it all the time, and I saw its power, because prior to then, I only called on students who were raising their hands. And if they didn't raise their hands, well, clearly they didn't want to answer. and who was I
to force them
to answer a question in my class? So what I first did with random calling, I know it's old school, but I did 3x5 cards. Yeah. I had them do their name on the front of it, and then I got lots of information from them. I had them redo each quarter. So I would use it as a connecting activity.
I think it's not old school. I think it's great.
On the back, I would have them write their goals, and that way I could look at those easily and often, and if a student wasn't meeting them, it was an easy talking point. But popsicle sticks are lovely. There are apps. Am I using that word correctly?
Playing cards.
Yep.
Okay, you can use playing cards, which is kind of Britt and Julia's deal. What's important is that students know that they could be called on at any time, which also should remind us that you don't pull a card or a popsicle stick and lay it to the side, because
we see a lot.
Which we see a lot.
Like,
because
you're done.
If my stick is pulled, I'm like, woohoo! I am on vacation for whatever remains of the class.
Okay.
That card has to go back in. You might get called, during class, you might get called 12 times. You might not get called at all. My students used to say, that's not fair. And I would say, actually, it's the ultimate in fair. There is nothing fairer. Now, that being said, some teachers I've seen even recently use random calling as a gotcha.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about random calling and anxiety.
Yeah, see, here we go. The podcast won't be long enough. You obviously go back to connect.
Know your kids.
Sorry. You have to go back to connect. You have to know your students.
Your kids.
You have to establish a classroom environment that says it's okay. I always used to say to my students,
right, I pull your stick, you don't know the answer, what happens?
We figured out there are multiple possibilities. Right. I always used to say, no one has died so far in this classroom from random calling. Everybody has survived.
Yes.
And so
I survived random calling. Is that your shirts?
We should. Oh, when I retire, I want all my former students to have those shirts.
All right.
So you establish that, and you tell them, here's what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I would tell littles that.
Don't hide it from
This is not a secret. You have to give wait time.
Yes.
And it's also a good idea to give talk time with a group or brief writing time.
And that helps lessen the anxiety too.
And so then it's not so anxious. It's not so anxiety driven for students. I'm an introvert, and people who know me, who don't really know me, are shocked. I just want to sit in a corner. Don't ask me questions. If I'm interested, I'm going to learn.
Yeah.
If I'm not, there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
That's how I wanted to be as a student. But had random calling been used, had I known that math teacher might be calling on me any minute, but that he provided me time to think, to work with my peers, to understand better.
And that it was safe if you,
and
then after all of that, you still didn't know.
It was okay. Yeah. Life was all right.
And can I just jump in on the wait
please,
time really fast?
I can have a sip of coffee.
And I want to go back to what I said earlier. The wait time is so important. Some kids have the freeway that they can recall the information or they can pull things together and in their brain. And some kids are on the surface streets. Yes. They have stoplights. They're stuck in traffic. They need the wait time. They need the opportunity because they do have the answers. So many of them.
It's not about intelligence.
Yes. It's just a matter of how they're pulling that information in their brain. And some of them just do it faster than others.
Right.
Sorry.
So, no, don't be sorry. So all of the above. I see teachers sometimes use random calling as a special occasion.
Oh my gosh, I just spit.
Sorry. Like, oh yeah, I use random calling. When was the last time? I don't know, 3 weeks ago. No, like this is an
culture. It's a classroom culture
it's a
thing.
Classroom culture, and
Yeah.
it's an everyday deal. Now, I'll be honest. There are times and moments when I didn't use it, but I didn't use it consciously for a very specific reason. Otherwise, those cards were just out and ready to go. So, as Britt acknowledged at the beginning, if I were the queen of the world, if I were the superintendent of the school district, if I were the principal at your school, random calling would be a non-negotiable. Every single teacher would have to use it correctly, and have that as the classroom culture. That's how much difference I think it could make.
Yep.
I also am passionate about equity. And really, this is the only true way to ensure equity.
You're hearing from kids
among your students.
Not just the ones that raise their hands.
Correct.
And would you agree that there can be multiple types of random calling?
Oh.
So we can do random calling for what color is Juliet's dress, which is great because a lot of kids could answer that. But we could also do random calling with a higher order question.
Oh, absolutely.
Turn to a partner, write something down, and then let's take a stab at it. And I just want teachers to see that it can be used as a powerful tool instead of this buzzword.
Yeah, it's not a buzzword, and as we started out,
And
it
it's
should
really
not be
important.
a gotcha, and it doesn't. It shouldn't be what color is Juliet's dress.
Or what? Okay, question
Britt,
number
there you
one.
go.
Question number one. Sonia, what is it? Question number 2,
See, a lot of
Matthew.
teachers
Question
do that.
number 3, Johnny. Question number 4,
You're
right?
hurting my heart.
But they're random calling.
But they are random calling.
Yeah.
So we
I know.
really
yay,
need to.
woohoo, but no.
No.
Yay, woohoo for you, but no. So yeah, it is part of when we talk about intentional instruction. Random calling is intentional, and it needs to be everywhere, but it needs to be used with intentionality. Okay, so wrapping up, I think the last concept I really want to talk about is in our domain of Instruct is student engagement. And because I think a lot of teachers are like, I'm not here to put on a dog and pony show. I am not here to be in theater. I am here to disseminate information. And all I want to tell them is Google has done that job for you. So what else do you got? Because they can Google pretty much anything and know what the answer is. So, Julia, what is the difference between student engagement and student participation?
I always like to compare it to compliance, student compliance.
Okay.
Students will take notes if you tell them to take notes. They will copy down what you're modeling on the board. That is participation. Anything that you ask them to do that doesn't require thought on their part or much thought on their part, that's participation.
And it's not bad.
It's not bad.
I love kids
It's
to
a
participate.
it's a
You have a whole
necessary
class
component.
on participation
Yep,
techniques,
participation
because
techniques.
that really is the first step into getting in the
It's
door.
the pathway to engagement.
Right.
That can't
Yeah.
be the only.
But you
But
can't stay there.
Yes,
Right.
and you can't mistake participation for engagement.
That,
And so the next piece then is once they're participating in the tasks that you're giving them, the next step is to get them thinking within those participation tasks. And that's where you get engagement. Engagement is critical for student learning because we know that boredom takes them backwards. It's negative. Is it 3.3 now?
0.33.
Negative 0.33. And we're talking about Hattie's effect sizes. And so it is our job to engage them. And when we say entertaining kids, we're not entertaining them, we're engaging
And
them.
they mix those up a lot.
And we
Oh
can
my
do that by
goodness.
making it relevant to them.
Yeah.
We can do that by making, again, I go back to the example that I said earlier with Atticus Finch. You can go back to the page in the book and describe Atticus Finch and copy the answer. Or you can really process, like, here's this quote, by this president, and now here's this character that we've been reading about, and now I have to make connections between the two. That's way more engaging than me just going back and copying things from the text. So
Participation would be copying things from the text.
yes, participation would be copying things from the text. So
you could give them choice, more choice will help engagement as well. So when we see students engaged, so we're watching a course, and if you're interested in active learning experiences, you need to go back, and I don't remember what podcast number, but Julia has a whole episode with just her and I on ALEs. So you can go back and listen to active learning experiences, and she provides a lot of examples in that episode. But I want to talk about, we're watching a class, we're observing a class. When we see engagement, what do we notice about the students first?
a passion that they hate to admit is there.
I know, right?
There's like
I think some of the littles would totally be like,
yeah,
this is so cool.
Yes,
right? Okay.
Yes, but as they get older,
students tend to be like, oops, I bet she saw me really
Smile. I smiled.
Yeah, there's an energy to
Yes.
engagement.
Yes.
And I don't.
It's palpable.
Yes.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Palpable.
for me, when I would see when I knew I had hit a good lesson mark was when some of my students would stand. It was so engaging. They literally had to huddle over whatever they were doing and move their body because they couldn't. They
contain
had
the
to
energy.
figure it out. They couldn't contain their energy. They had to do something.
Yeah.
And I loved always seeing that.
Yeah.
And it really can be felt. I'm sort of struck by that right now. But we visit so many classrooms, and when I walk in, I can feel a classroom where there's true engagement, and it emanates from the teacher first. I've never been into a classroom where the students were truly engaged and the teacher wasn't.
Yeah.
You can't have one without the other. You can feel it, and it's not just an energy of kids busy.
No,
I walk into classrooms
different.
all the time. So when Julia was talking about compliance, when I used to teach a class about participation versus engagement and talked about an engagement ladder, and I don't remember all the steps now, but it talked about ritual compliance. And I talked about that some students are complying because their parents expect good grades or they're planning to go to college. And so they're doing the work.
Tell me what I need to do to get.
But
And
then at the very bottom of the ladder, we have rebellion. Which is why when teachers call us out, and we probably talked about this before, but when teachers or principals call us out to help someone with classroom management, it's almost always about instruction. Almost always about instruction.
Yeah.
And that's why, because the students, we were talking about boredom, the students are so bored, and I hate that word, but there's no other word, they get naughty. And so students from the bottom rungs are either naughty or asleep. Those are the two options. Above that, you have that ritual, like, I know how to play the school game.
But then there's engagement. And when there's true engagement, it is exciting. So you touched on this. So we see it with the students. We feel the energy. What do we notice about the teacher in that classroom?
She's tired at the end of the day, but so filled with adrenaline.
Okay. What do you think?
Sometimes, truly engaging tasks can't be predicted how they're going to go.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes the teacher can look like the scientist watching an experiment happen.
Absolutely.
Right. Just that awe of like going from group to group or pair to pair, student to student, just watching. There's this very fascinated, the teacher's engaged in his or her own way in watching what the students are doing.
Yep.
And so
it can't be predicted.
No. And I think that's what makes it so powerful. It shouldn't be able to be predicted.
Right.
My favorite lessons, and you hit the nail on the head when you said that the teacher is also engaged, were the things that were completely unpredictable to me and to the students. And we would throw questions at them all the time, or activities that we never know if they would land or not. And, but we thought they would be interesting, and I would get called over. It was like I was in this middle of a tornado of positive, interesting, even at times frustrated, but not in a mad way, but just inquisitive. And I had to be the knowledge person. Like they were asking me to clarify. And if I couldn't, I would have to pull up a chair and I would, or bend down.
I love that though. They love that.
And that's what I would see. If I look in a classroom that is student engagement, the lesson design and the instruction has happened in such a way that the teacher is no longer up at the front or at the desk, or they are literally with the students.
They're collaborators. They're collaborators in the learning process.
Right. And not always right. Like I would tell the kids like, oh, I didn't think about that. Hold on. I gotta think.
Oh yeah, they love that.
Yeah, and we would like go back and forth on ideas, and then we would finally land on something, and we'd hit something mark, and then I would go to the next group, and like, yes, I was tired. My brain was kind of tired at the end of the day, but I was.
But it's adrenaline.
It was like a fulfilling, and I think that's where we need to go with instruction. Is students need to be doing the thinking. Students need to be doing a lot of the. Not the work, but you know what I'm saying?
It doesn't mean that I think there's been a misconception
with
though,
that.
Britt. There's been, and it came from Harry Wong. If the teacher's doing it, and I love Harry Wong, wherever he is, I think he's still alive. But he's, the student should be tired, not the teacher.
No,
I'm
that's
sorry.
not what I'm saying.
Teaching is
It's
tiring. But it means that you're not the only one. The teacher isn't the only one doing the hefty lifting. You're doing the hefty lifting.
And my cup
together.
is full.
Yeah.
I think if a teacher feels like they're doing all the work and their cup is empty, that's when we get burnout.
Yeah. That is a true statement.
So I wanted to say like the kids are doing the thinking and they're doing a lot of the engaging, but then the teachers are too.
Right.
But it's filling their teacher cup.
Right.
And I think that's at the end of the day what really good instruction will look like when you walk into a room.
So a misconception that I encountered when I first became the instructional specialist at my school in Mesa, I would go into classrooms and I was advised to just drop into classrooms and everybody knew me. It was not a big deal. But I would come in sometimes and a teacher would say to me, today's not a good day. I'm not teaching. And I'd be like, what's happening? Oh, well, the kids are working on this jigsaw and they're reading this text. And I'm like,
that's a perfect day.
I do not want to see you standing in front of the room talking.
Yeah.
That was the definition of teaching. I'm not teaching today.
That. Yeah.
Every single day should be teaching, but that doesn't equate to lecture.
So you're going to love this next question. Are you ready for rapid fire?
Oh, yes. And I have not read the rapid fire questions.
Okay.
I promise.
Whoever wants to go first, you guys could go off back and forth.
I don't care.
The first one is instruction must be blank.
So I'm trying to think of something clever and creative.
I'm going to go with the predictable one, engaging. It has to be engaging.
Yeah, see, I'm still pondering all kinds of deep thoughts.
I know.
Which is why I mean.
But I want to pose this to you, but I also want anybody listening to be thinking of their answer as well.
Right.
Because I really.
So instruction must be. So I agree with you.
Oh, absolutely.
Engage it 100%. Must be about the student learning.
Must be student-centered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being super often, how often do you see random calling being used in classrooms?
3 or 4.
1 or 2.
I would say 3 or probably, 2 or 3. Yeah, it's low. It's low.
Yeah.
And it makes me want to cry.
Yep. And we already talked about it. So I want people to really know that's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. If you don't believe me, call me.
Name one of the 7 dwarfs and then relate his name to good instruction.
I'm going to go with bashful. Okay. Isn't that one? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wendy's looking at me like, what
Really?
planet are you from? Is that a good higher order question?
That is a good higher order question.
You are welcome.
I'm going to go with bashful. And I'm going to talk about how when we design, when we're intentional with instruction, we are creating those active learning experiences that brings those bashful students out of their shells, that allows them the opportunity to feel like they can participate in the learning, because there's so many different ways for them to be active in the learning that meets their needs or meets them where they are as well.
Okay, I may be using this question in my next classes. You absolutely love it. Thanks, Britt.
You're welcome.
I can't name all 7 dwarfs, but the first one, I'm going to be honest, the first one that came to me was Dopey. And then I couldn't come up with any of the other ones. I'm like, what are the names of the other 7 dwarfs? Dopey, 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 Dopey. And so I'm going to have to think about that later, about their names.
Sleepy.
But then don't go there, because that's dwarfs boredom. We've been lately.
Yes,
So Dopey, relating that to instruction. We cannot be dopey, and I'm still seeing teachers whose hearts are good, and they want to do it right,
and dopey is good-hearted
and they think they've been doing it right for the last 50 years. But instruction is more like Doc than Dopey.
She just remembered one.
I remembered one. Yeah. I did. And Sleepy reminded me of that. I remember what you said a minute ago. Bashful. Okay, and Happy. I would also say Grumpy.
Yep. Grumpy is one.
But really, Dopey. Instruction is not about being dopey. It's about being clear-headed, clear-hearted, clear vision for what you want from your students.
Would you agree that we have all types of dwarfs in our classes, and that we need to make sure our instruction is fitting? And that way we don't have a sleepy or a grumpy.
I'm now going to be thinking about students in terms of
the 7 dwarfs.
The 7 dwarfs. You have ruined me.
You're going to love this last day.
Okay, so who is your first celebrity crush?
Jean-Luc Picard. I know.
I love this. I knew
if you know me,
I knew this answer, so that's why I wanted to ask.
Patrick Stewart. And I was, oh my gosh, when I was watching Star Trek Next Generation, I was young. I was like 8 or 9 years old. And I don't know, just he was so smart and he was I don't know.
Oh, it's so you.
Yeah, I know. It is so me.
Okay, girl.
Oh my goodness, I'm thinking of all the posters that were up in my room. People YouTube probably don't even know. Okay, for sure, Donny Osmond. That was probably the very first. I mean, come on, it was Donny. But then when I got just a little bit older and a little bit more rebellious, David Cassidy.
There it is.
Oh yeah.
With the hair.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
I can see that.
Because he was like the bad boy, Donny Osmond. So those were the first ones.
And last question: using your best Elmo voice. You don't know who Elmo is?
Yeah, I mean, he's like orange,
I got this one covered.
He's
You're good.
orange?
Isn't he
red.
Orange?
He's red.
Oh, he's red.
Yeah. Okay, Julia's going to go first, and then you have to go. She's going to model good teaching for you.
Okay, can you make a clarity map for me on Elmo? And I first have to define Elmo.
No, so yes, that would be your starting out.
Okay.
So using your best Elmo voice, tell me how you like your coffee.
La 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 la, la 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 la, lots of splendor.
That was so good! Oh my gosh!
I need way more instruction than that. How about you want me to do Mae West? Can I do Mae West?
You can do your Mae West. Go for it.
You can see me sometime. I like my coffee dark. I don't know. I haven't done Mae West in a long time, and I sure as heck can't do Elmo.
I love all of that. And that, I don't even know I'm going to start to teach or whatever I'm supposed to do today, mentor other people. Okay. All right, listeners, if you would like to learn more from these two lovely ladies. I'm trying to get through this. You can find them at wendy.peterson@gilbertschools.net and julia.peters at julia. Sorry.
All right, we're breaking down.
At gilbertschools.net. And thank you guys so much for coming on today.
We're all crying. Don't break your glasses. Elma. Would you like me to do my Elmo voice again?
Oh gosh. All right. We are signing off, and our next episode will be on assess. So if you're looking for things about assessment and how to do informal and formative assessment and summative assessments, that's what our next episode will be on. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Learning Unlocked and finding out more about quality instruction with your students and having some more clarity, intentionality, and engagement. I know the end there, we got a little kooky. I think the coffee and the sugar rush kicked in. But honestly, it's like being a fly in the wall in our PLC in our office. That pretty much is how we talk to each other about education, but there's also a lot of fun. And I hope that for all of you as well in your professional learning communities. If you've listened today as a GPS educator, you can receive PD recertification credit by visiting our Employee Hub page and navigating to professional growth and then digital PD courses. Just a reminder that we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at GPS Prof Growth. That's at GPS PROF GROWTH. For more information or resources from this episode, please visit our website at learningunlocked.libsyn.com/website. We are distributed by Libsyn to Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Audible. Episodes are also available on our YouTube channel under playlists. Our intro and outro music are licensed from Melody Loops. And of course, if you have time to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, we would appreciate it. The more ratings we get, the more views will be seen by teachers around the world. Thanks again, key holders. You keep unlocking that curiosity, creativity, and innovation with your students. Stay kind and courageous and have a little bit of laughter, and I'll see you next time.